So do you remember last week when I was like, next week we're gonna do something that's not a fan video? Well, that was the plan. But what had happened is I was off to the races making a new version of this. Remember this thing? This was that tower cooler we made that actually turned out pretty good. And I was like, you know what? I got a new resin printer. Let's try to redo or make a version 2, because I know a lot of you guys want to see it. That was smaller, more compact, that maybe functioned just as good. And things were working, and it actually was turning out halfway decent. Things were going together, and then I tested it, and it just, I didn't test its cooling performance, but I was kind of just testing its functionality. And it worked, but I wasn't super thrilled with it. And rather than make it like a half-ass attempt, I thought, you know what, let's just do some redesign and we'll get back at it. But then I broke the screen on my resin printer, which was a bummer. So that actually just showed up yesterday, so I have that installed. So I'm back to fixing that. But yeah, that's not ready. So we're gonna do the next best thing, Fan Showdown. Now I will say that if you remember any of the past episodes, you know that a lot of the fans that we look at are out there. There's a lot of designs that are just off the wall. They're awesome to test, but sometimes you would not expect them to make the board, and they're still here. But these fans this week are a little more tame, I guess you'd say. They're what you would expect a fan to look like, well, except for one. But other than that one, he's out there. But other than that one, they're pretty standard. So maybe we'll finally get somebody to knock off the Tulip, because, my gosh, how is it still up there? I literally didn't even think it was going to make the board, and yet, here it is. So the first fan we'll look at is Ruth. Now all these fans have been printed in like a white satin PLA Pro. It's made by Ultrafuse, so if you guys want to use it, I know a lot of you guys asked what PLA I use for a lot of these different fans, and I'm going to start putting the links in the description. So this Ultrafuse is supposed to be stronger than normal PLAs, and for at least one of the fans that required a lot of support material. I was very surprised at how well it held together, especially given how rough I was on it. But Ruth is designed by Grant. It spins at 1,693 RPMs, and for the most part, it looks pretty standard, except for these tips. They stick up quite a bit higher than the hub. And because of that, when you put it inside of the fan shroud, or inside of the shroud that holds it, these tips actually stick up farther than the shroud, and if you're not careful, look at your fingers. Ask me how I know. Now, for the most part, I kind of like how that looks. It gives it kind of a real aggressive kind of look, and it just looks like it'll be efficient. So I hope that'll translate into good performance. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But for the most part, Ruth looks like it has potential. Now, next up is a fan that kind of goes in the opposite direction of what we see commonly on the channel, and that's this one. This one's called Flatten. It's by Emily. It spins at 2,108 RPM. And she said the idea here was to go for a much shallower angle of attack to maybe increase the rotational speed, produce more static pressure to the radiator. I don't know if that'll work, but I do know that normally we see a lot of blades that have a real aggressive angle of attack, and we also see a lot of rings. None of the fans on the board have rings, but a lot of people like to go with rings, but Emily decided to go with winglets on the bottom, and we'll see if that actually turns out to be beneficial. But either way, it's flat, and this is the one that almost killed me trying to get all the support material off there. You'll notice that it's a bit rough, and that's because I went to battle with this fan. But I got most of it off there. I hope I did good enough for you, Emily. We'll see how well it works. Now this one actually looks pretty cool. This is called the Refractor. It's made by Clarence, and it spins at 1,896 RPM. And there is just something about these blades that I find appealing. Now, one, the print came out really clean because it didn't require any support material, which I like. But the hard angles, I don't know, reminds me of like the Stealth Fighter or something. It just looks like it means business. And I'm very curious to see how well it works, because it's not very conventional, to say the least, if you've noticed anything about this. We'll save that for later, though. Now, I said somebody was out there. Well, that's this guy. This is the cheese grater, and it literally is a disc with holes in it. I don't know what the idea here is. This was made by RCMZ. It spins at a whopping 2,257 RPM, And I don't know if this will work at all, but I think it looks cool. I don't know why, but I think it does. The holes are at least oriented like you would expect fan blades to be, so this should work. I don't know how well it'll work, given it's mostly plastic. Or is it mostly holes? I don't know. So let me do the math on that. But you would think, looking at this, that that is going to do nothing. But if you put it on a bit of an angle, I don't know if you guys can see it, you can see right through there. So there is passage for the airs. There is passage for the air, and I bet you could use this as a cheese grater. I didn't try that. I probably should have. But either way, I think all these are pretty sweet. And now it's time to see if they're just cool designs or if they actually function. Let's check out some smoke machine. So did you notice there was one fan missing in that smoke machine montage? It was this one. What do you notice about this fan that's different than all the rest? Well, it's kind of designed to be on a fan that spins clockwise, right? Well, the A12X25, that's a counterclockwise fan. And I'll be honest with you, didn't even notice this little bit of an issue until I was doing the smoke machine test. And I was like, wait a minute, it's not working. But instead of getting a new fan, I decided we'll leave it in there because I was kind of curious to know what happens when you take a fan that was designed to spin one direction, but spin it the other way. Does it even work still? And that was kind of interesting. Now, if you look at the smoke test, you try to pour smoke in the front. Obviously, there is some air moving out. But then when you pour in from the backside, you can see that it's being drawn through the radiator. So this, although was probably an oopsie, is still working. So we're going to leave it in there and see how well it does. But before we get to how well they cooled, let's talk about what they sounded like because they weren't really that quiet. Let's start with Ruth. Ruth wasn't too bad. It was at 43.9 dBA and it sounded like a fan. Nothing really too special. Now the flattened fan I thought was interesting because I would think since the blades are at such a low pitch angle that it would be not that loud. It wouldn't be like ripping the air. It should be quieter, I would think, but it was actually pretty loud. It was at 48.9. The cheese grater, now I would think that would be quiet because it's essentially just a disc spinning, but it is moving air, and it was 48.1. But what I found the weirdest is the refractor. Now the refractor, like we were talking about, the blades are oriented in the wrong way. And I was really interested to see how that not only did for cooling, but sound-wise. And it was surprisingly loud, 49.6, which I did not expect. It was the loudest out of the bunch. Perceived, it sounded the loudest to my old grandpa ears. It was pretty loud. But all in all, none of these fans were actually really quiet at all. But how well did they cool? Well, Ruth had an average temperature of 81.5 at a room temperature of 21.5, giving it a delta of 60 degrees. Flatten had an average of 82.5 at a room temperature of 21.9, giving it a delta of 60.6. The cheese grater had an average of 84.3, so it didn't throttle, at a room temperature of 21.7, giving it a delta of 62.6. And the refractor, spinning wrong, had an average of 81.8 at a room temperature of 20.6, giving it a delta of 61.2. So it didn't even do the worst. Obviously, it only beat the cheese grater, but still, it's very interesting. So in this group, Ruth was first, Flatten was second, the refractor was third, followed by the cheese grater, and overall, that puts Ruth at 9th place, Flatten at 12th place, the refractor at 14th place, and the cheese grater at 19th, which is very interesting. Nobody has knocked off the tulip, which is mind-blowing to me, but maybe next time. But thank you guys so much for sending me all these designs. This is literally, is a lot of fun to print these out, see how they go, and maybe next time, one of these days, we're gonna get somebody to knock off Thomas and his Pikachu tail fan. Peace.